All right, welcome back to the No Space. Today we are going to be talking about squash and stretch. We're going to be doing this in 2D in Blender though. If you want to check out the other video, it has this same concept but in 3D. But I have some people who wanted to do this in 2D, so let's check out how we do that. Squash and stretch. Let's go over the general principle here of what squash and stretch is. So squash and stretch is a principle from the 12 basic principles of animation by Disney. There's some OG Disney animators that were around from a long time ago, and they made a book. Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas, they talked about the illusion of life. It's a Disney animation book. Basically covers how to do some nice animation, whether it be hand-drawn or for computer animation. And the principle that we're talking about today is the squash and stretch principle, which is, but if you're going for, artistic style, you can do whatever you want. So if you want it to seem exaggerated, you can do that. If you wanted to have it exaggerated, it can have a comical effect. So it's all a matter of what you want as your effect. If you want it to seem realistic or if you don't. So here's a good example right here. A ball bouncing. Here in figure A, we have it without any kind of squash or stretch. So it looks exactly the same, static. Here you can see with squash and stretch, as it's moving through the air, it is changing its size. And it's seeming longer like an egg this way. When it hits the ground, it flattens out. And then when it pops back up, it starts to stretch in this way. So this is just a way for you to be able to exaggerate and make animation seem more interesting. All right, excellent. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if you want it to seem realistic, you want to have your volume be consistent. So if I have a square, as it's moving down, if it's falling and I want it to stretch, I will not only have it stretch and be longer, but I also want to make it thinner. I want to actually squish it in so that way the volume on the inside appears to be consistent. Likewise, when it hits the ground and it flattens out, the same thing, I want it to pancake. I don't want it to just get wider. I want it to also lose its height, so that way it seems like the same amount of material that was in that cube flattens out and it ends up looking kind of like this. All right. So I'm going to open up Blender here, and we're going to discuss how you can do this with 2D animation. Now in Blender, there's a few ways that you can do 2D animation. And you can actually mix 2D animation with 3D environments and with 3D animation, which is really unusual for most 2D animation suites. Which really gives a lot of interesting capabilities that you can use to make your projects more interesting to look at. However, for this particular tutorial, we're just going to talk about using 2D in a very basic sense. So when you open up Blender, this is version 2.91.2. You want to go down, instead of going to General under New File, you can go to 2D Animation. So just so you know, everything that you do in a general file, you can still do with 2D animation. It's just going to set up our workspace to be more akin for 2D animation. So I'm going to click on 2D animation here instead of general. It's going to open up this box. So it's all white. Now, if I scroll out with my mouse wheel, you'll see that I still have a camera. I still have a camera going on here, and the camera space is just the default what you see here. And if I click on the camera view out here, and I use my mouse wheel, you'll see that we still have a camera that's inside of 3D space. So this is no different than it is in regular, when we create a general project with a default cube and all of that. It just makes the background all white, and it sets the camera to where it's perfectly level to the ground, to the grid, and it removes the light that's there. But if we wanted to, we could still like press Shift A. We could still go into object mode, and we could add 3D objects in here. Shift A. I could still go in and add cylinders and blah blah blah. I could add 3D objects and models in here. It just sets it up to where we are ready to draw. So if I go back to my camera mode, I just wanted to show that to you so you know that really everything's still the same in Blender. Just going into 2D animation mode changes the way that the defaults are. So I'm going to go back up here, get out of object mode. Sorry, here. Grab my camera. Just go back to our 2D animation default here, just that way it's all the same as it was before. Now, the main difference that we're going to have here is that when we start, we have this collection, and we start with this item in our collection called the stroke. And the stroke is a grease pencil object, which basically lets us draw in this space. And you'll see up here on the top left, where we normally have object mode and edit mode and all that, we also have something called draw. And that's what we're playing with right now. Now when it comes to drawing, we also down here on the bottom, we have our timeline for our animation, and we can see that we have lines and fills in our stroke object. Now over here on the right hand side, you're going to see something that looks like a little squiggle. Usually when we click up here on like the camera or the light, we have like a green squiggle that we can change. The same thing happens right here. If we click on this green squiggle, this is how you can see the different layers of your drawing. So I'm going to make a few different layers that I can use to be able to draw some type of animation. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new layer here, and I'm going to make it my background layer. So you see that when I click on the plus right here, it creates a new layer. This is called GP layer, general purpose layer. I'm going to call this a background. There we go. And then I'm going to make a ball. So I'm going to click right here on ball. I'm going to make another layer and call it ball. So I'm just going to have two different layers. I'm going to have a background. I'm going to have a ball. So let's start off with the background, the bottom layer. Keep in mind that this is just like a stack of papers. The thing that's on the very bottom is going to show up behind everything else. The thing that's on the very top of the stack is going to appear to be closest to the viewer, just like in 2D animation or 2D stuff with Photoshop. So let's start with my background. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to draw a square. So right here I'm going to have a box. I'm going to click on that box. Now the thing that you're going to want to know is, when it comes to being able to draw, is that you have your different types of strokes right here where it says solid stroke. You can click on this and you can create new strokes if you want to. You can create new types of things. I'm going to make a solid fill. So I'm going to click on solid fill, and now I have that as my solid fill type. So when I draw out a square, it's going to fill this up. Let me go ahead and just click and drag, and I can see, all right, I got a filled rectangle. Awesome. Now, what you can do is you can change the color of this fill. Let's say I didn't want it to be gray like this. If I want it to be a different color, you can go up here to the top. Oh, by the way, when you click and draw this out, it doesn't finalize your object until you tell it to finalize it. So you can see that when I draw out a rectangle, if it's not quite the size I want, I don't have to redraw a new one. I can go in here and click on the bottom right or the top left over here, and that will let me resize this object. Now once I have it to the size that I want, I'm going to press Enter on the keyboard. And now it has been finalized, and it's an object in this space on the background layer. And I can hide it if I want to by clicking on the little eyeball here on background. Now if I wanted to draw something else, let's say I didn't want it to be gray like this, I want it to be a different color. Well, right now it's in material mode, which means that I could change it later on if I go to my materials and I change what this solid fill material is. But right now, let's not do that. Let's not mess around with that. Let's make it to where I can just paint stuff and I can choose what color I want for each object. To do that, you click on this other option right here, this other mode, which lets me change to the color that is displayed right here. So if I click on this, now I can just pick a color. I'm going to pick purple because we're Vikings here. So let me get a nice purple color. There we go. And now if I click and drag, it's going to be purple instead of that gray color from the material. Now keep in mind, in order for me to finalize this, I have to press Enter on the keyboard. Bam, there we go. Now I have a purple color. Cool. This is my background layer. anything that I put on the background layer is going to show up here. So right now it looks just like this. If I wanted to move this around and stuff, I can do that. I would just have to go out of draw mode into edit mode, and now I can select this object and I can move it around by pressing G and then moving it where I want. So the same kind of rules apply. GX will move it along the x-axis. GY will move it along the y-axis, which is closer to you. And G and Z is up and down. So if I wanted stuff to appear further away, I would use the y-axis. It's kind of interesting that y is going to be moving stuff closer or further away from you. Now the reason why this is important is, once again, if I go out of my camera mode and I look at this 2D object is an object in 3D space. So when I'm moving it around, I'm actually moving it around in 3D space, not 2D space. It just appears 2D because I have this camera that is looking at it, and that's actually what I'm looking at. So this allows you to like put background layers further away from the camera, or put characters and stuff closer to the camera, and it really helps you with being able to size objects and doing stuff in proportion. All right, let's add a ball in here. So I'm going to click over here on my ball layer on the right hand side, and now I want to draw a ball. So let me go back into drawing mode, and I'm going to grab a ball. So I'm going to grab this circle right here. All right. So I want my ball to be a different color. I don't want it to be purple. So I'm going to do yellow for more Viking type colors. And I'm going to click, and I'm going to hold down Shift as I click and drag, and you'll see that it makes a ball of perfect size, perfect proportion. So let's say I want it just to be like that. There we go. And so I have a ball. Cool. Maybe I want to put this ball in the middle of my canvas here. So after I have it the size I want, I can press Enter, and now I finalized it. If I want to move this ball, I can press G, and then I need to go into edit mode, press Tab, press G, and now I can move. Oh, I got to select the object I want to move. So I want to move the ball. Click on the ball, press G, and now I can move it where I want it to go. All right, cool. You can just press G to grab it and move it where you want. All right, let's say I want it right there. I'll start it right there. Or actually, I'm going to do an exact animation of what that example was. So I'm going to have it bounce across this canvas right here. So I have it right here. Now, what do I want to do with this? I want to take this ball and I want to move it over here, and I want to stretch it to where it stretches along this axis, and when it bounces right here, it's going to squash down. So first, how do I get it to move? Well, down here on our keyframe editor here, our timeline, we can basically create keyframes, much like we did in the past. So I'm going to move this forward to like frame 10. Then I'm going to press G and move. Oh, I don't want to move the whole canvas. I want just the ball. I'm going to click on the ball and press G. Move just the ball. And I'm going to move it like right here to start with. And then I'm going to press S, and that lets me scale it. Now, if I just press S, I'm scaling the whole ball, so I'm making the whole thing bigger or smaller. But if I want to scale in just one direction, like S, Z, now I'm just scaling in the Z direction. Ooh, okay, so I can like stretch the ball a little bit, make it taller. And maybe I want to rotate this so that way it appears to go from the previous direction. Now, something that's helpful to note in animation is that there's a little option over here in our layers that says, it's a little empty ball, and it says onion skinning. This is really helpful. So I would suggest that you use it when you're doing animation. If you click on this little option right here that says onion skinning, it's going to show where the previous frame was. So if I go right here and I click on this ball and I move it up, I can see where the previous frame was, and it kind of shows up as a little ghost here. So I want to take this ball right here, and I might rotate it. I'll press R to rotate it after I click on it. And maybe I don't want it to be scaled up quite that much, but that's okay. That's all right, I think. There we go. So I've got the ball. It's probably a little bit too much. Let me go back to where I stretched it. I'm going to stretch it in the Z-axis. I'll stretch it just a little bit less. A little bit too much there. Press G, move it where I want. I probably want to move it down here. I want to show you how you can you can do in between frames as well. All right, so I'm going to rotate this, press R and just tilt it a little bit. That's good. Now I'm going to go to frame 20 here. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to grab my ball. I'm going to move it. Put it like about here. It's probably good. And now I'm going to, once again, stretch it, scale it in the X direction. Ooh, so if I rotated it like I did here and I still want to scale it along the X-axis or the Z-axis, you can change your transformation orientation to local instead of global. So global means that X or Z is straight up and down and X is left and right like this. But if you use local, that means that it's going to be in relation to the object I have here. So up and down is going to be in relation to how I rotated it. So now if I scale this by the Z-axis, it shouldn't be scaling it quite the same way, which is pretty useful to know how to do. But let's say I have these options here. I can see that my ball is going to move from here to here to here, and then in frame 30, I'll make it actually squash down. So let me grab this object, G, move it down here, rotate it back to where it's straight up and down. Then I'm going to scale it along the X-axis to squash it this way. And I'm also going to scale it along the Z-axis to make it squash down. Like that. That's pretty good. Let me squash it down on the X-axis a little bit less. There we go, something like that. Hey, Zavita. I'm going to grab this and move it down a little bit. There we go. All right, that sounds great, Zavita. I'm teaching a class, so I'll talk to you in just a few minutes.
Okay.
All right, now if I wanted to get this to where the animation would actually fill in the in-betweens that we have here. Like, let's say I wanted to make it to where I don't want to have to draw every single frame. We're going to talk about this more in principle later, but...
I was just practicing a rainbow song for my rainbow birthday.
You gonna sing us a rainbow song? Go ahead and sing us the rainbow song, Zavita.
It goes like this. Rainbow girls, have rainbow decorations.
Awesome, Zavita. High five. I love it. All right. I'll see you inside in a little bit, okay? I'm teaching. Daddy's teaching. Ooh. No, it's interpolate right up here. So what you want to do is, if you're in draw mode, you have to press tab to go into edit mode. And then from there, you go up here to where it says interpolate, and you go to interpolate sequence. And if you do that, watch what happens. Ooh, look at that. It built a bunch of little keyframes here. Woo! And it's trying to figure out mathematically how it's going to go from a regular old ball like this and move the strokes to where it fills in the in-betweens here and makes the object seem to change over time to be able to match each keyframe you have here. Awesome. So then from there, if we want to do the same thing down here, we just put once again, we put our timeline here in between our keyframes. Then we go up to interpolate and sequence. And bam, it fills in all the keyframes in between there. Oh yeah, look at that ball. Now it's actually like seeming like it's being animated well there. Right here it's going to flatten out, so I got to go put my timeline in between the two frames here. Then go up to interpolate and sequence. And look at that, it's going to build, that ball is going to flatten out. Blah! Blah! Perfect. All right, cool. So from this point, we want to do the same thing that we did before. We want to go forward in time. We want to take this ball and move it up, maybe rotate it. Let's say go there, gonna move it, like say right there, rotate a little bit more, maybe flatten it out a little bit. Oops. S, X, gonna make it that way, and S, Z. Flatten it out a little bit. There we go. And I might want to rotate it a little bit this way. the way it bounces. And we can see with the onion skin thing enabled, we can see where the previous frame was, which really helps us to think about how we want to draw our next frame. So I'll go to the next section here, and I'm going to click on this and press G to move it up to where I want it to go, maybe rotate it, and maybe scale it along the x-axis a little bit, and scale it along the z-axis a little bit. And lastly, I want to get it to actually be a ball over here on the other side. So what you could do is, you could take a frame like this, you can take this and copy this frame, right click, copy, go to the end frame here and paste it, and you could actually take the object and make it to where over time it appears to be about the same. So let me go ahead and interpolate these sequences here. You can see that this allows you to, boing, it's traveling kind of in a weird way right there. Probably don't want it to quite rotate that much, so I could go to this keyframe right here, and I could just take this object and rotate it a little bit less. Maybe I want it to go more up like that. Maybe move it back a little bit. Now, if you want to change a keyframe, you do have to go back and take out all those interpolated frames, because if you don't do that, then it'll overwrite what you did. So when you create the interpolated frames, that's like a one-time deal. It does it once, and then it's pretty much set in stone. So make sure that you kind of check in between each time you do this, that you check to see where the next one's going to be and see if you like where it is before you interpolate. So now if I interpolate the sequence, let's see what it looks like. Boing. Yeah, it looks okay. If you need to add more frames in there to make it look more realistic, you know what to do. You just add some more in there. But this is the basics of how you can get 2D animation to work. You can draw your frames. Make sure that you turn on onion skinning over here, so that way you can see what your previous frames are and what your next frames are going to be. That's really helpful for making smooth stuff. And then make sure you make multiple layers. That way your background isn't in front of your foreground or whatever, that you don't draw everything on one layer, especially if you want people with like mouths, facial expressions. You can draw just the body and the face or the head, and then you can draw facial expressions on layers that are on top, which will make it easier for you to be able to manipulate them. So very useful to do that kind of stuff. That said though, let's say that I'm not quite done here, but we don't have much time here. So I just want to show you once again, how do I render this out so I can get an actual video of this. Let me go ahead and put some interpolator frames here. There we go. It's just 50 frames. That should be fine. All right, so let's say I want this, and I'm all done with it. I enjoy it. I might want my timeline here to be a timeline instead of what we have here. So I might want just 50 frames down here on the bottom right. You can change what your start and stop frames are. I'll type in 50 because I want it to end at frame 50. I'm just going to have it bounce, boing, like that. That's fine. I might even just move this. Let me press Control Z. Take out those interpolated frames. Take this frame right here. I'm just going to move this further over here. There we go. Now I'm going to change my end frame to 50. I'm going to add some interpolation in the middle. Adding those tween frames. There we go. Takes off. All right. And now, how do I get this to actually render? I go over here to my output settings. Go to frame rate. I'm going to make my frame rate 30 frames a second. Go down to where it says output. Change this to like videos. There we go. Make sure you name it something. I'm going to call this 2D ball bounce. 2D ball bounce. There we go. And then I'm going to say accept. It's going to save it in my videos folder. Under file format, I'm going to change this to FFmpeg video. Then under encoding, you want to change the container to MPEG 4. And I would change your output quality to be high quality. And now, all I have to do is go up to render and render animation, and it's going to come up with all those individual frames. There it goes. It's making our 2D animation. Boing. If you don't want it to change shape before it hits the ground, you just add some more frames in there, some more keyframes, and make it to where it doesn't change its shape until it gets closer to the ground or until it actually hits the ground. So once again, this is just showing you how you can use squash and stretch with your animation, how you can make a 2D animation. Now if I go into my folders and I go to videos, I can see that I have that 2D ball bounce animation. There it is. Oh yeah! Look at that thing. Amazing! Alright, I hope that you enjoyed this process. We talked about squash and stretching animation. We talked about how Blender does its 2D stuff. We talked a little bit about the grease pencil. And we talked about how you can change colors, how you can have different layers that you can add to. We talked about how you can add in between frames, in between your keyframes on your timeline animation. I hope that you have fun with this experiment. Have fun with it. Be creative. The best way to learn is just to go in there and do it. So I hope you have a great time. And until next time, remember, think for yourself and be that person that you wish you could be. It's not too late. You can be that person today if you want to be it. All right, everybody. Enjoy.